Greetings and salutations, friends. Welcome to my first patch notes / dev diary session. Here we will be looking at new additions to the game Imperator Rome. New features, reworked mechanics, or anything else that they've been working on in the new Pompey patch. So let's go ahead and jump right in. Our first change is co-ruler, dual ruler. Aristocratic republics will have co-councils. The characters that get the highest number of votes gets the council position, and the second highest is the co-council, who will often be from a different party. For power generating purposes, the highest stat between the two councils will be used to determine how much power is generated. Co-consul loyalty affects party member loyalty. If the co-consul is disloyal, it will increase power costs up to 25% and will cause every party member in his party to take a loyalty hit over time. Co-consul traits are also added to the country. Corruption, however, is added together. Yikes. So the co-ruler, dual ruler thing is pretty cool. It gives more flavor to similar government types, allowing you to have more interactions between different characters. Speaking of which, consorts, the next one, is also going to be a co-ruler. In some monarchies, they will act as a co-ruler for power generation, where whichever stat is higher will be used for generating that power. They also receive a loyalty debuff if the primary heir is not their child. Yeah. And if disloyal, like the co-council, powers will cost up to 25% more. As far as government systems, office holders will now have their benefit from that office tied to the loyalty they have, including research, which I think is awesome. Loyalty would be shown on the government screen as well. The government screen now has an offices tab, and the law screen will now show 8 choices instead of 4. Government will now have abilities. Each government type will have its own unique options. Republics, for instance, will have powers based on each party that have its own effect, and the power cost is halved if that party is in power. The civic party has cheaper building costs. The military party has more discipline. Mercantile party gives you cheaper trade routes. The religious party gives you cheaper conversions. And the populist party allows you to pay money for reduction in corruption and increase populist support, but only if the populist party is in power. Monarchies get a war council where every 10 years gain claims to adjacent areas. Demand an oath of allegiance, increasing support for your primary heir over time, and holding games, which works about the same as it did. And finally, patron of the arts. Civic power gives primary culture happiness and civilization over time. Tribes gain a war council, which is the same as the monarchies. Assemble raiding parties, oratory and military power are traded for enslavement efficiency, and encourage tribal migration. Lose 5 tribesman pops for a drop in centralization. Next up, naval combat gets a facelift, which I think is pretty cool, and we shall see how this actually plays out. So capturing ships will be based on the types of ships that is being damaged and the types surrounding it. A swarm of lighter ships could easily capture a heavy ship, for instance. Tactics will be added to the naval combat, appearing very similar to land tactics. 3 categories of ships with their own strengths and weaknesses have been added. Light, which are highly maneuverable, high morale damage. They are good for flanking and can be used very well in rivers. Medium, which is a balance, less maneuverability but far more resistant to damage. And heavy, very limited maneuverability, high strength damage, and has 3 unlockable abilities, and heavy ships are unlocked via tradition. There will be 2 types for each category with a variety of roles. I've put the list up for you to see. I'm not going to read through them all, but I'm sure you can get the gist of it if you want to pause it. Heavy ships will have naval projection abilities, which I think is really awesome, giving them unique abilities that can be used necessarily outside of combat. So we have Capture Port, which allows you to take direct control of an unfortified port. Wow. Port Raid allows breaching with your ships during a siege. That's cool too. And Port Assault, used on a port with a level 1 fort to reduce the fort level by 1, requires Mega Polyreme. So it requires a certain actual type of ship. And I'm not really sure if I understand how that works, but I guarantee we will surely find out when the patch finally drops. All countries will have a naval range based on their owned ports, which I think is great. It puts a limit on how far you can go and makes you raise it if you want to go somewhere exotic or very far away. We will also be having navigatable rivers, and I'm a little skeptical about how useful this is going to be or how much we're actually going to be doing this. So we shall see on this one, but I'm fairly excited to see if it works. They will also be adding terrain to the sea, 3 different ones in fact. Open sea, which gives no bonuses, coastal sea, which gives a defender advantage, and river terrain, which gives defender advantage with a light ship advantage. Simple, but I love this. I really do. It's the fact that the light ships can be used in rivers to extreme effect will give them like a little niche to where you might want to have a few fleets chilling in your main river ports. They will also be adding specific country names for ships that are used in the game. So Sparta and Macedon and Athens may all have like different names for the same actual type of ship, which adds a little bit of cultural flavor. Pretty cool. Next, we're on to the religion and omens. Different religions will now have different omens to choose from, which should lead to different playstyles, one might think. Specific cultures will also have their own unique omens as well. They will also be inserting a path to be able to change your state's religion, which will be extremely costly and not done lightly, and will have many requirements, which should be listed on your screen. This seems like a rather light modification of the religious system and will probably need more fleshing out in the future as more patches drop. I think they just didn't really focus on the religion. They just wanted to give a little something to satisfy the community. Pirates are also getting a rework. They are boring in the base game, and that is something that I'm sure most of us agree with. Either suffer from them or get rid of them, and that's about it. I usually task specific fleets with hunting down pirates. I've never actually used the law to do it because I don't care, but it's just like you could just turn them off, essentially, for a minor sacrifice. But they're doing a rework, so pirates will now be more like mercenaries, placed around the map and are hireable. Pirate locales are now predetermined, pirate havens. If left unemployed for 2 years, they will leave and go plundering. Pirate havens can be cleansed permanently as well, and piracy can still be outlawed, and if you outlaw it, it will give you a casus belli on anyone who harbors them, and it's under the laws and policies. Condoning piracy will create a pirate haven in your own port. We will also be seeing storms in this patch. They will last for 2 months and will be very, very visible. You will see rain, wind, clouds, lightning. We will have sea storms, desert storms, and winter storms, which increase the attrition in all affected zones, which I think is really awesome, so it makes you pay attention to the map. And they are huge areas as far as I can tell. Volcanoes will be making a bigger appearance in the Pompey patch. We will have more volcanoes and eruptions, more vents. Volcanoes will also become searchable and are now clearly visible on the map with a big caldera as a sign of the volcanic presence. They also cause considerable damage to the local area after an eruption if it is not cleaned up. More flavor events are being added to the game, including relationships between the state and slavery. And this should be interesting. I really feel that even though slavery was an acceptable thing back then and that everybody did it, it's very light on the interaction with how slavery works with your government, because many different governments and many different societies had different kinds of slavery. Next we have road building. The player will no longer have to build each section of road. Simply choose a destination and the army itself will delegate and construct the road until the destination is reached or you run out of military points. And I think this is a great quality of life addition because it could take years for armies to build roads because you had to leave and go do something else and completely forgot that they were building a road. So you could just auto build roads from one point to another as long as you have the military power for it, they will do it. You will now be able to release a subject. Any owned province may be released as a subject, taking your culture, religion, government tech level, and inventions as their own. Foreign characters have been added to a foreign character list in the diplomacy screen, making it easier for you to pick influential targets in a foreign government. Essentially adding a list like your own character list so that you can actually find people if you want to do some subterfuge and whatnot. The macro builder will be getting a facelift. It will now be sortable, and it will have a list that will show the effects of each button click. Hovering over the buttons will reveal a full tooltip with all affected values. And this is something that I absolutely love. Is they give us more info, the ability to see what the effects of the changes that we are thinking about making will do, so you can decide how much you actually want to invest in something. The ledger will also be making an appearance in Pompey, a huge quality of life addition that I know many people have been clamoring about. And it's one of those things where it's like, I think it shouldn't be in the game, but that's because I think they should make it a mechanic rather than just giving it to the player, where you might have to set up spy networks or any number of other things to be able to get this information. But as it stands, it's a great addition, so you will have as much knowledge as you can stand, and if you like that, that's great. But I just wish it were more of a tactical thing. They were doing a revamp to alerts, so they would have new alerts for ideas and decisions. So if you're not picking your ideas, it'll let you know. And it'll also have alerts for when your ships are outside naval range, since they added that. The province interface is going to be getting a huge facelift. The interface no longer covers the center of the screen. Yippee. There will also be a distinct city and province interface, with the latter now being retractable. Will contain circular diagrams for POP's religion and cultural statistics, as well as tax and commerce income. The city list will also still be there, but it will be in a retractable form. Playing tall got kind of a buff. Improving your provinces can now be done by spending your monarch powers. 400 power per ability for 4 new abilities, which after 2 years you will get a permanent bonus until the end of the game. The first one is install provincial procurators. Military power will be spent for 2% population output and 0.01 monthly province loyalty. Now that doesn't sound like much, but if you're playing tall, that could be big. Promote infrastructure spending. Civic power for a building slot. That's actually quite big. Entice business investments. Oratory power for 1 import route. And make religious endowments. Religious power will give you 3% state religion happiness in that province. State investments can also come from events and other decisions. Now, while I'm happy about this, I really like the fact that they're trying new things, and it looks like some stuff that may have been in Europa Universalis 4 or some ideas from there. Whether it pans out or whether it's any good is going to be up for debate until we actually see it. And even then, it'll still be up for debate for a while. Changing the fact that building slots are no longer in line with population is going to be kind of interesting. We shall see. They will be adding 2 new governor policies, centralization and decentralization. Centralization will move 1 pop from a random city every 3rd month to the capital. Decentralization will move 1 pop from a random high population city to a lower population city, spreading out the pop evenly over time. Both will reduce output by 10%. And I rather like this change because it allows movement of pops without directly costing you any monarch power. And while it's not as efficient as moving slaves or citizens around yourself, it is a way that you can redistribute your population without spending monarch points, which is, in and of itself, pretty good. Cities will now have additional abilities. Every city will be able to move the capital, you'll be able to move the province capital, and you'll be able to do urban development, which allows you to pay 100 civic power and you get a 2-year +1 civilization to that city that can be repeated sequentially. Now, I rather like this, giving the player more control over their empire/republic/tribe by allowing you to make the capital whatever the hell you want it to be. It also allows you to move province capitals, which I don't really know what that would really be useful for outside of very niche situations, but I like the fact that it's there. Clan retinues will also be reworked a bit. You will be able to direct them to what kind of units they are allowed to have in their retinues, including how they deploy them in battle stacks, which is pretty good, but we'll see whether or not the AI can actually handle this competently. Limiting the kinds of troops that they can have will definitely help a lot, especially if you don't want them just filled with like lots and lots and lots of shitty light infantry. Holdings are getting a market improvement. In the current state of the game, they're nothing more than flavor. They don't do much other than give characters a little bit of supplemental income outside of government jobs. Holdings will always be owned by characters and used for both income and power base. More on that later. Cities must have 10 slaves to have a holding and will gain another holding for every 10 slaves it has. Once slaves are associated with a holding in a city, they cannot be moved or promoted, but they still may starve to death. This is a very interesting mechanic. I like this. It essentially makes the slaves an integral component of the holding in and of itself so that they can't be separated from it. Although I don't know how historically accurate this would be, considering slaves were the property of their masters and not the property of estates. So we'll see how that goes. Holdings can be given for a large loyalty boost, or taken as punishment, or just if you want to be an ass. Characters will buy them on their own and have ambitions to do so. The number of holdings that they may have is limited by their finesse skill. And on death, characters' children will inherit the holdings. Who gets what is unknown at the moment. This comes with an updated mechanic of power base. Apparently this has always been in the game, but is receiving a massive facelift so that you can actually measure its effects. And it measures how much influence that an individual character could wield and how many troops they could raise in a civil war. The power base is based on the number of loyal troop cohorts, the number of owned holdings, any titles they may have, and how many pops they actually rule over as a governor or ruler. And lastly, their total wealth. So holdings are now going to be used to give you a sense of who's the most powerful, who's the most influential, and who you got to look out for. It'll just give you more flavor on how you're going to backstab everybody around the table. This leads us to civil wars. The Civil War number used to be based on the amount of cohorts owned or that were loyal to disloyal characters, which is a weird mechanic because you would try to keep disloyal people from the army, and if they started to get disloyal, you'd probably switch them out, stuff like that. But now, instead, it counts the total power base of all disloyal characters. So even characters that you don't give a damn about, who don't really do anything, can now cause you to have a civil war because they're so powerful and so influential and they just don't like you. When calculating for a civil war, the total power base of all disloyal characters is compared to the total power base of the entire country, including its ruler. This will probably make civil wars far more interesting. All those disloyal characters that you just don't care about, that you just shuffle off to the side, it's like, oh, they're 60, they'll die in a few years, it really doesn't matter. Well, now it does matter. The threshold for civil war is 33%, so if the total power base of all disloyal characters is 33% or greater than that of your empire, then you really have a problem. This threshold is also increased and decreased with stability, which has its own rework and we'll get into later. Now, trials are a big thing that I hope add some really good flavor here. And disloyal office holders and generals can now only be removed from office by bringing them to trial. You can no longer just dismiss them, just get rid of them, or any of that nonsense. So you either have to bring that loyalty up, or you have to bring them to trial. Success of a trial is dependent on how corrupt that character is, as well as their power base. So the more corrupt they are, the easier they will be to put on trial. The bigger their power base, the more turmoil it will cause. The trial itself is an event chain where your decisions during this event chain will help determine the outcome. Now, this can seriously backfire, and if they're powerful enough and other people who like them and don't like you are powerful enough, it could start a civil war, or it could increase the power base of the disloyal character, or probably Paradox is probably going to throw in a bunch more really bad things that could happen if this goes wrong, making you not want to do it unless it was very, very necessary. There will be a new mechanic for creating mercenaries. When a monarchy has loyal members of the royal family, they may be sent away to become mercenaries. So if you want to get someone out of the way, or if you want to send one of your sons off, or daughters for that matter, off on adventures to do whatnot and whatever, well then you can do so. It could get them out of the way, get away from plots that other people are putting down, and it could be just an interesting little mechanic that you could play with in any number of ways. Speaking of scheming, they have reworked the ambition system to be a little bit more visible to the player, including actual schemes that any players may have. This will give the player more info about what characters are up to when you look at their character panel. Schemes are the character's goal-based ambitions, which include killing off rivals, buying land, holdings, holding an office, and it will be interesting to see how Paradox develops this tool. Because that's what it is, and it allows more character interaction, more flavor, and allows the ambition system to really allow the characters to take control of their own lives, as it were, so that they feel more like real people and less just like AI-controlled spreadsheets. There will be very specific ruler schemes that you can do. Siphoning funds from the state to yourself is one of them, increasing your own personal wealth. At this point in the game, I have not really seen a reason to increase the personal wealth of my character, mainly due to the fact that in a republic it switches a lot, and even in a monarchy, the only thing you really need to make sure that your ruler has enough money for is to hold games, so that they have enough money to match the state. So it'll be interesting to see how siphon funds really plays into it. You can also influence characters. And finally, the good old assassinate characters. It's a very classic one. And you could do so either in your own country, which could get you in a lot of trouble, or abroad, which could get you even more trouble. Prove legitimacy is an ambition for some types of rulers in some types of governments that can increase their legitimacy by a small amount, and has a rare chance to trigger an event linking them to a long-lost lineage, possibly giving them a massive boost to legitimacy. They've done a lot to overhaul the trade system, as many aspects were a little bit too powerful. They removed easy extra trade routes. I totally did this to snowball trade, so I kind of like that they took it out, because it prevents you from doing the absolute no-brainer thing of lowering your commerce so that you could get a trade route everywhere, and then setting up trade routes to get massive amounts of money. Lots and lots of money. It was insane. So one of the other changes is the mid-setting for trade tax will now give you one extra trade route in the capital. Commerce is now a province-level calculation. Each port in a province now gives +1 trade route, and several trade goods will now receive different bonuses. Glass will now increase local civilization level. Precious metals is now tied to city loyalty. Spices are now for citizen output, while dyes for citizen happiness. And a surplus of wood in capital now gives +50% shipbuilding speed, and export gives 20% shipbuilding speed. Also, just as a quick side note, light ships will not require wood as a trade good and can be built irregardless. But having an actual supply of wood means you can build medium ships. Buildings themselves did not escape this patch and have been changed to adapt the trade and population rework mechanics. Marketplaces now give 10% income from a city. Training camps give 10% local manpower. Fortress 1 fort level. And granaries give 5 population capacity. Other modifiers increase granary pop capacity, and some of these are pretty big modifiers. Speaking of population growth, they have split into 2 different numbers, capacity and growth. Capacity is how many can live in a city based on terrain like rivers, ports, climate, what tech you have, your civilization level, and the amount of granaries. And granaries gain different bonuses from different types of terrain that you live in, be it hills, mountains, plains, that kind of stuff. Pop growth is now influenced by resources as a situation, like being invaded. I hate the looted modifier. Grr. You can no longer naturally grow larger than your population cap of your city. You can go over it by introducing slaves or moving people there, but you will not grow over it naturally. And if you are over the cap, you will get severe penalties to your population. I'm assuming it'll be unhappiness and things like that that'll lower your production. Barbarians will now have different mechanics to work with. Paid off barbarians will no longer loot your territory. Barbarians that have fought in a battle will never accept surrender. Barbarians will no longer care about potential strength when you negotiate with them, and only about the armies in their area, because they're stupid. Barbarians are no longer clever enough to use zone of control, even if they have a fort, because they're barbarians. They have no concept of such things. Barbarians have no longer any attrition in unknown provinces. Barbarians reinforce twice as quick when not sieging, which is pretty cool. Barbarians will now grow in size as they take over provinces containing tribesmen. Now that is a very interesting mechanic, and I can't wait to see that, because that could easily snowball way out of control. We will also be having a few zone of control changes. Zone of control now protects against the barbarians doing their little bad thingies within your territory unless they take them. They also protect against attrition due to bad climate, and I love this because it means that if your armies are within the range or in the zone of control of a fort, then they will not take attrition due to weather, desert, stuff like that, which is really awesome. So it means you can actually augment areas of the map so that they can more easily handle your armies. And it makes a little bit of sense that if you have a fort nearby, you really wouldn't be taking attrition from the desert and all that stuff because you'd have supply runners and things like that. They will be adding a new system called the Heritage System, which is a fairly simple 2 benefit, 1 drawback that adds a little bit of flavor to your country so not every country really feels the same. It seems rather simple, and we'll see if it helps or not. The system itself is based on the capital city of your country and or other circumstances. So for instance, I believe Sparta and Athens and Egypt all have their own distinct ones, and there's about 20, I believe. I think this was just kind of like a throw-in thing that the devs did. Instead of doing an entire rework of every single country in the game, or a dozen of them or so. They threw this in as flavor, and they're going to probably expand on it later, where they'll flesh out this system to be more integral to the game, probably at a later date. Some miscellaneous stuff from both the patch notes and the dev diaries is, as far as tech goes, base tech time has been increased from 15 to 20 years, and tech time penalty will now be made a multiplier of tech speed. In several of my games, and I know other people did this, your research point accumulation was just so damn high that your behind tech modifier didn't even matter. You were able to negate it if you pushed it far enough and min-maxed your research in that way, and it prevents this penalty from becoming useless. They've also increased the base time it takes to research any technology from 15 to 20 years, so we'll see how that works. Shattered Retreat has been reworked so that you no longer can do it without any downside. Retreating of your own accord will now make you take a 50% loss to your remaining strength. It's a bit OP without any drawbacks, and I totally agree with the devs on that. It should have some type of penalty if you're going to use it. Breaking Truces now gives you aggressive expansion. How much has not been mentioned, but I'm sure we'll find out. Mercenaries, as a whole, they reduce the amount of companies on the map. They can no longer be stacked wipe, and instead they will take their discharge fee and simply leave the employ of their employer. Instead of buying a mercenary stack immediately and then accidentally running them in and having them get stack wiped, they will simply retreat with whatever strength they have left, and then they'll take their money and run. They can no longer recruit mercenaries till they have full strength, so if they're shattered or if they are at less than optimal, then they can't actually build their armies up. They've also increased maintenance by a whopping 50%, so it'll definitely be a little bit harder unless you are just rolling in the dough to hire entire armies of mercenaries. Governors will now use their finesse attribute to increase the city's output by 5% for each point. I think before it was more like a soft benefit of finesse doing something. I'm not sure what it did. I still used the finesse stat to determine which governor I wanted, but I'm not really sure, or nor did I ever really see any benefit from doing so. Stability has been completely reworked and will no longer be a range of -3 to +3 stability, and it is now a sliding scale of 0 to 100 that tends to congregate around 50. Sacrifice of the Gods now gives a small stability per month for over 5 years and increases the cost of Sacrifice of the Gods. Multiple uses of this will stack the 5-year buff, increasing the monthly tick. I think this is a pretty cool idea. Stability felt like it was more from Europa Universalis 4, and it wasn't really fleshed out. It was just kind of there to give you something to do with your religious power. I like the fact that it also trends toward 50. So if you do things to raise it over time, slowly it'll build down, and if you're below 50 over time, it'll slowly build up, which is really awesome. Also, just in case you were wondering, it requires 10 stability to start wars and appoint people to your government. So if your country is completely unstable, you can't do ish. Who knew? Legitimacy has a similar mechanic to stability and will no longer be an instant increase with a button press, and it will also be a bought stackable short-term buff that will increase your legitimacy over time. War exhaustion is similar to stability and legitimacy in that you can no longer spend power with the press of a button to instantly get rid of war exhaustion, and instead you spend the power and then you get a reduction over time. I'm assuming you can still do this while you're at war too, so it'll help mitigate rather than get rid of your war exhaustion. Assimilation and conversion cost is now 30 power. I believe it was 20. I'm not sure how much I like this, but yeah, we'll see. We'll see. Makes it much more beneficial to do it via governor policy, which I rather like, to be fair. I just wish there were more mechanics to do it other than just the governor policy, like a building you can build in a city that will make it more likely to convert pops, or building schools or some nonsense like that in a city will make it easier for the entire province to be converted to your culture. That would be really cool, and it would be exactly how it would be done, right? You would build libraries and educational facilities to help the local population civilize itself and learn of the superior culture that is your country. We'll also be seeing a few AI improvements, as in the AI will no longer run at low maintenance if a neighbor is a player and is not allied. And I think this is freaking great, because I can't tell you how many times that I've started a war with a dude and he was relatively even with me, and I completely and utterly obliterated them because the moment the war started, I was able to either stack wipe or completely destroy their army because they were at low maintenance, which is just dumb and was an oversight, no doubt, that the devs had, which gave the player a huge advantage. So yay for this, good stuff. And I believe that wraps up this Dev Diary / patch note session, and I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you get a little bit of information out of this, and that my analysis has helped you in some way. I think this game definitely has the makings of being an extremely great game. It needs way more fleshing out, and it needs to be deepened in the extreme. And over the past 3 years, Paradox has been pretty good at doing this for Stellaris in many different ways. So I'm hopeful that Imperator Rome, with the Pompey update, will be an even better game than it currently is. So thank you for joining me today. If you like this or any of the other content that I produce, please give a like and subscribe and leave a comment below. It really helps with the analytics. And I will see you next time, my friends.